everyone, my name is Cathy Disbrow and I am the needle felt artist of Woolly Doodles. So today I'm going to show you how to create your very own needle felted pin cushion. You can see here in my super cute tomato how I actually also put my felting needles in here, and they're easy to take in and out, and it's perfect to have on the side of my felting pad. You also can have pins. I have some sewing needles in here, so this is just a really nice beginner's project where you could create something fun and functional. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you how to create your basic tomato shape out of white core wool. You could use other color core wool. I'm going to talk more about the red tomato, but you can also create green tomatoes, dark red tomatoes, yellow, orange, right? This is your project now, so you could pretty much do whatever you'd like. So once we're done creating the core shape, I'm going to show you how to add the red top color onto your tomato. As you can see here, this is considered an heirloom tomato, so I will show you and talk a little bit about how to create that like green, what looks more like a bleeding or like a paint spilling edge around it. You know, it comes from the top and goes down. I also did the same treatment to my green tomato. I will show you how to create a stem and the 6 leaves that go around that stem. As I said, this is a great beginner's project, and I think you'll have a lot of fun. You don't need to make the tomatoes into pin cushions. You could very easily just create, you know, like 6 to 10 and throw them in a bowl. I think you'll find this is a lot of fun, so you'll probably make more than one tomato. They also make great gifts. So why don't we go ahead and get started, and I can show you how to needle felt your very own. All right, so here you can see more close-up photos of the tomatoes that I was just talking about. So I'll just set these two aside. So here's the one with the actual pins and needles in it. So you can see how it's just easy just to take out and put them in, but you can see you could fit even more than this on here. It balances itself pretty good. You just have to make it solid enough that the needles will go in and not squoosh in there. But I'll talk about that. Here are the 2 reds. This is just more your standard red tomato. And then this would be considered an heirloom. And there are so many heirloom tomatoes out in the world that I would just recommend Googling it, and then you can see all the different colors and ways that you could needle felt your own tomatoes. Just a quick with the tomato, I'm going to just talk more about just a solid tomato that looks like this. If you go look up heirloom tomatoes, sometimes you'll see they have ridges in them, almost a little more pumpkin-like, but I'm going to stick with just the standard tomato in this beginner's video. All right, so this is what I call core roping. I have a needle felting beginner video that you could watch to learn a little bit more about the core wools and top coats and roving versus batting and all that fun stuff. So today I'm going to assume that you have watched that video. It is in my YouTube channel. It's called Needle Felting 101, Basics of Needle Felting. So definitely go ahead and give that a watch if you have not. If you've felted before, you already are familiar with using core wool and top colors and things like that. Okay, so I decided to use white. White is readily available. I buy, this particular one came in a rope. It's called Chunky Core Roving. This is actually Canadian, from Alberta, Dorset wool. So when I start with the tomato, I just pull off just a certain amount. A lot of times I'll measure, say, 12 inches. It doesn't really matter in this project. 12 inches for me is from the palm of my hand until I hit my elbow. But you really don't need to worry too much. This is a very organic project. You know, a tomato is a fruit. I don't know if you knew that. So you know, it can be wonky, it could be misshapen. It doesn't really matter. What we're going to do is we're going to just make sure that it can stand on its own, and that when you put needles in, it doesn't get all squishy. So hopefully the technique I'm going to show you is going to be useful. So what I do is I don't want to use that whole piece. I like to work small and build up. So I'm going to split it in half. So what I've done is I went into the center and I started to just pull in the middle. And if I want even pieces, see how when I'm pulling on this, I'm using my hand to get an even pull, like I'm moving it around. Because if I just go to pull it, it might be like kind of like thick and thin. So that's how I get it to be a bit more solid, or sorry, even. Now, if you have batting, like a big bat sheet, like you bought like wool batting, what you can do is just pull strips off. So in this case, I'm just going to set one aside. Again, I measured this from the middle of my palm to my elbow. It looks like I went a little further, so this is probably more like 14 inches. Again, as long as you have a piece that's 10 inches or longer, you'll be good. You don't want it to be too long. That might be a little hard to control. So what I've done with this project is I don't really have a measurement on this, just basically the palm of my hand. So if you want it, if you have like a specific tomato size or a size you want, I would say you want the roundness to be that size. I'll go for my palm. So if I'm going the same width of my palm, because this seems to fit perfectly right in my palm, and it's a good measurement for the size. This one's a little bit larger, but it's still about the same. And same with this one, right? They're all around the same size. So what I'll do is you could take your wool and you can roll it, and I'm tucking it under my hand. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to get it to the width of my palm, right, as I'm rolling it. Now, I want to tuck these pieces in here. Oh, I better take my needles out of my tomato. Right, so as I'm doing this, I want to tuck in the sides. I do a very similar technique when I make pumpkins. You know, with the pumpkin, I do add the ridges, but in this case, I'm just going to, like, right, so I'm just taking this fuzzy piece here and I'm just tucking it over like that and stabbing it. Right, and so again, I'm losing a little bit of my sizing, but as I add wool to it, I can build that up a bit more. This is just to give me a basic size of my width. You know, I'm going to want to make this more rounded, so I give it some stabs as I'm going along. So what I'm saying is that, like, as I'm going to eventually get this to be more rounded. So this is just one technique that you can do to create your core shape. I often use a skewer when I create core shapes, especially if I want them to be really solid. I also tend to use a multi-tool. I use the single needles for more detailing. In my classes, I also use a single needle. My kits come with a single needle. If you're going to do a lot of felting, I highly recommend getting a multi-needle tool. So here I'm just stabbing it now to get it more rounded. So, whoop, whoa, see the magic of video. Okay, that just went flying up. I was just going to show you it's pretty soft right now. And it's not really round, it's more oblong. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to take that second half that I showed you and I'm going to split this in half. So I'm splitting that in half, and so again, as I'm splitting it, I'm just making sure that that there's no loose pieces. Now, if you again have batting and you're ripping sizes, this is about 2 inches long, right? So the core roping I had, and I would say it's probably 1/2 inch thick. So right now what I've done is now I have a 1/2 inch piece, right? That is about 1/4. This is probably about 1/4 of an inch thick, but by the time I pull it apart, it winds up thinning out a bit, right, from what was here. So if you were looking at some exact measurements, then it would be a 1/2 inch by, say, a 1/4 of an inch. Now, you could go, again, this is a tomato, so we don't have to be super fancy and be super accurate. But if you're worried about sizing, it's always good. You could use an even smaller piece. All right, so what I'm doing right now is I am attaching, so it's easier for me to wrap, I'm just going to go directly around because I want to start building a shape that's going to be rounded, which I'm going to then help flatten a little bit to give it that more tomato shape. Right, so what I'm doing right now is now I can wrap around my piece. This is similar. You want to wrap away from your face. My face is over here, so I'm going to wrap away. You do get a tighter wrap. I have watched videos where they recommend this, and you do get a tighter wrap when you wrap away from your face. So when I'm wrapping, I'm always holding it very close to where I'm wrapping, right? And I always give it a little gentle tug. And when I bring it around, I actually am taking my index finger and I'm pulling it tighter to the shape. If you wanted to get it, if you wanted to go for more round, you can do this like X shape, right? So like you can go over this side, then come back and over this side. That will also help get a more rounded shape. I realize that I'm going to show you another technique on how to create your core tomato shape, and that might be a little bit faster than this. I find it's all individual preference when it comes to needle felting, and also sometimes you might have some physical limitations. So right now I pulled out my multi-needle tool. This is a Clover pen tool. I've taken a needle out. I actually like using it without the third needle. It does have 3 needles, or holds 3 needles, I should say. If you've got a larger tool, like some people have wood ones, and you could put a few needles in. I don't want to have anything that's too crazy, like something like this has 5 needles, and I can use it on here. But some of those big wooden ones are a little bit too big. So when you're starting a project, to avoid stabbing your fingers too much, I'm not saying you're not going to stab your fingers, but to use such a big tool, I wouldn't put more than 1 or 2 needles, and I would keep them a little bit closer together so that you're able to target a specific spot. This is like one I like to use a single needle is. I might lose some control over what I'm trying to do if I have a multi-needle tool. So again, individual preference. I hear all sorts of different recommendations online. I recommend finding what works best for you. So experimenting and trying different things. If you don't want to invest the money in the multi-tools right away, maybe you could find a friend that would let you try theirs. Okay, so what I'm doing now is if I squeeze the sides like this and I start to stab down, right? So I'm never stabbing toward my fingers, right? If I squeeze it, what I'm doing is I'm connecting those wool fibers, right? Squishing it a bit. So now I'm getting it to look a little bit more rounded. Again, it's building out. I can add more on this side. I think I'm going to leave it alone. If you look at this tomato, it is a little bigger, but once I go to add my top on, right, that will add a little bit of depth. The wool that I'm using is also a Dorset. I also use Maori batting that I really like. It's just all dependent on what you have, right, when you want to go add it on. So this will actually add a little more density because it's a Dorset wool. Okay, so now I'm going to take this piece, and again, I'm trying to get this rounded, so I'm going to do another wrap around. The reason that I do this is this way I won't have to hold it so tight. I'm still going to keep my finger on it just to make sure it doesn't slip out. But by giving it a few stabs when I lay the loose fibers over, just help connect it enough that I'm not working as hard. So I'm going to do that X pattern now. So I'm going to go X, X, and then around. And again, as you can see, I'm always giving like a nice little tug or pull when I come around. And I want to get those loose fibers in there. Again, you can use the multi-tool. Will go faster. You will definitely go faster using a multi-tool. Again, you could use the 3. Again, there's no rule as to what's best, but it just helps to felt it a little faster. And again, I'm gently squeezing this. This is a natural, I've been felting for a long time, so I just find that I automatically just start to push the sides in. And again, what I'm doing is condensing the fibers together. And so as I stab, they'll connect together a little bit tighter, right? So already I'm getting a firmer piece because I've started wrapping tight on here. So I'm going to keep doing this until I get it to the size and shape that I want. So I'm pulling another thin piece off, and see, this is what happens when you're not being super careful. See how it's like different thickness? So I'm just going to pull this off. I could use this a little bit later if I need to just add a little bit more. And again, I'm just going to keep wrapping and wrapping until I get it to the size I want. What I'm going to talk about while I'm doing this is there's another technique that you could do where you can wrap a knot into your wool and then wrap around the knot. I'll show you that in a little bit, but I'm just sharing that with you because that can help you get a tighter wrap to start with as well. You know, so again, it's all preference. And if I use the multi-tool, see, I can get this to go faster. It's supposed to be a quick video, right? All right. So again, I'm building up the shape. If you have one already made, you can kind of take a look and hold it up against to see the sizing. So I was talking about this little piece I pulled off. I could use this to help build up mass, like covering up around this side, right? So this could be used to just add a little bit more bulk to it. If you have it, maybe you just need a thin piece. You can take a little thin piece and you could just wrap that around. So you could always use your little pieces for something. I'm not getting any weird lumps and bumps, but if you do like get a divot, you could always use some of this extra wool to create a patch, right? And what I'm doing here is I'm just rolling it on the pad, right? I could give it a couple stabs and then I can like fill in that if it's got a hole in it or, like I said, a divot. We're all individuals. If you're a beginner, right, you know, you're just learning, controlling wool. It takes a bit of time to get the feel of wool and know how to handle it. I've done a lot of projects, and so like I was talking about earlier, is that I just was automatically squeezing the edges, knowing that it would help dense up the wool. Using different types of wool can make a huge difference in your projects. You have all that kind of stuff. There's so many factors that go into your projects and needle felting. I've tried quite a few different types of wools, probably somewhere around the range of probably like 15 different wools, and I have my favorites. Dorset is a really nice wool, and I can get that in Ontario and in Canada, which is where I live. And I know the US has tons and tons of fiber farms that you could go to. So if you have a local farm, you know, contact them. Romney felts really nicely. Coopworth was one, sorry, Columbia wool was one that I really liked. Coopworth felt pretty nicely. I'm not a fan of using merino. It's very soft, but you can get merino wool in the US and Canada. So there's all sorts of different types of sheep. So if you're going to get into felting and you have a local farm, talk to them and say, you know, hey, I'm needle felting, just wondering, like, do you sell fiber? Do you have it in batting or in like a batting type of wool, something in core? And yeah, they'll love chatting with you. Okay, so I've just been adding some strips. Like I've just been pulling strips off of that roping that I had, and I'm getting happy with the size of mine. For the sake of time, I'm just going to add one more wrap to it, and so see how thin this piece is, right? So this is probably around around 1/8 of an inch thick. I'm just going to just hold it down here. Again, you could tack this in if you want to. And then I'm going to, again, do that X and then in the middle to help get that rounded shape. And for time's sake, I'm going to use my multi-tool. I want to be able to talk about the colors. Adding the top coat color. That can take a little bit of time. I find making your shape to start can be a little bit of time. Felting is not a fast craft. You know, I mean, any kind of fiber art takes time. Knitting, crocheting, weaving. Well, weaving takes a long time. Yeah, so, you know, you just have to have a little patience, and the more, just like everything, the more you do it, the faster you'll get. Okay, so right now what I'm doing is now I'm just stabbing around. I want to smooth it out a little. I'm going to use my Clover 5 needle punch tool. There are other brands out there. I do really like the Clover needles. I'm not an influencer. I just like using the Clover needles. You can use any replacement needle in these tools, but you know, I do like using the Clover tools. So that's a nice little, I know it's an endorsement plug, but I'm not getting paid, so this is just my opinion. I'm sure people have their favorites. And again, you can a lot of times buy from wood carvers or at like a fiber market or something, right, the wood that you can add the stuff to. Okay, so this is about, right, so now I've got it about the size I want it. Because I wrapped this, it's already got a bit of a flatness. It didn't get quite rounded. If yours is really round, you could take any of your needles and you could just, you know, stab it to flatten it. Sometimes you could just do a little, like if you do a little press, or you can stab along the top and bottom, right? You don't have to worry about that so much at this point, but it's good to get your basic shape. And again, here I'm holding it in my hand and see it. I did add a little bit of bulk, just adding some thin pieces to it. I'm not too worried about, like, oh, when I'm looking at it in the camera, like, oh, it wasn't completely rounded, right? That's not, you know, this is really good. This is a good start for your project. I was talking about another way of doing this is you could take your roping, so you could create your rope. This piece is half a piece of that roping I was talking about. And so I'm just going to tie a knot in the center like this, right? So what I'm doing is I've tied the knot, but if I just pull it, it's going to pull the wool off, and that's not what I'm going for. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be wrapping around the knot, right? So I'm moving it this way, and I'm only tugging very close because these fibers are shorter because it's in a batting. So if I pull out here, it's going to pull it. You could almost see like it's very spongy, like it could pull out here. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take one side. So I'm right-handed. I should have said that in the beginning. I'm right-handed, so I will always hold things. I tend to hold things with my right hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the one side, so what was on the left, just around the knot. And the tighter I wrap this, the firmer that this piece will be. I'm starting off, I usually start off with a 36 triangle needle. That's a very standard medium needle. Sometimes I'll give it a little stab right here. You don't have to, but so I just give a stab around just to make sure that those fibers stayed on, right? So they're not falling off. And then I'll grab it and I'll just take the tail on the other side and I'll just wrap it around this way. And so right now I'm getting a very tight wrap. It's a little messy. You can see all the loose fibers that are on the end, and you'll need to shape that by stabbing onto that. So this, now you're going to have to sit here. So I'll take my finger and I'll tuck that, and you're going to want to flatten this on. Like, so you want to keep it rounded. You're going to sculpt it rounded. This is sculpting, right? We're sculpting with wool. So I'll tend to pull on the piece with my finger, very careful. See, I went near my finger. I'm being very careful. You could use your multi-tool at this point, but again, be very, very careful of your fingers. I'm always moving my fingers around. So if you're concerned about that, use your needle. Now, I'm finding as I stab into this, my triangle needle, because I made such a tight wrap, I'm going to go to my 38 star. This is my go-to needle for a lot of my projects. I just prefer the 38 star, 40 triangle, 38 triangle. You know, play, have fun, test out needles. There is a felting needle in the works where I talk about what needle do I have, and I'll talk a bit about the felting needles in general. I tend to travel toward me. I apologize for that. Okay, so now I've got a basic shape. And again, as I said earlier, you know, you will then, I'm going to take small pieces. So see how small this is? So I'm going to be working with smaller strips, and I could even go even smaller and build up this way by doing that X and then in the middle and then right, start the X. I find that I never have it long enough that I can get more than like one X in the middle and then usually like another middle. A lot of times what I'll do is I will also, I do the one on this side, then I'll come here and I will do it on, right? So I did it on this side, and now this is like, this needs to be built up. So I'm going to work on that side with the X and then in the middle. And then tack that on. So this is going to help make it more rounded. So again, this is all preference. So I would say try both ways. Again, you're going to make at least 2 tomatoes. I'll guarantee you'll make at least 2, because you're not going to hate this project. And there's no pressure, right? It's a tomato. Nobody's going to go, ugh, why is that like misshapen? If they do, then unfriend them. Okay, so that's, all right, and then I would keep working to build it up to be about this shape. Right? So I hope you found that helpful. So now I'm going to add the red to have it look more like this tomato, right? So I've got this red color here, and what I do is like, so this is what I was saying by a felt sheet. Actually, I'm going to move that aside. So what I want to do is I don't want to make it too thick. So again, I said this is a Dorset. If you're using Maori wool or something that's a bit thinner as a top coat color onto your tomato, right? You don't want it to be super thick. So I'm going to take the color. You can see through the color. I'll talk a bit about covering that, but right now the idea is to get color on it, and I'm just I'm feeling the wool. This wool does have more holes in it. So what I'm going to do is see how I'm like laying it on. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to like add like another. I'm going to make it so that when I put it on there, you can't see through. But like I said, this wool's a little bit thick, so it will definitely, you're definitely going to see it create more of it's going to get bigger. So I'm just going to use my multi-tool. In this spot, I would definitely use you don't have to use a fine needle, but I would use a finer needle so you don't see as many hole marks. Even though, I say that, even though if you make this, if you're going to use yours as a pin cushion, it won't matter. But using a multi-tool, these Clover tools come with what they call a fine needle, but they're actually 40 triangles. And so that would be finer than what I was using. Okay, so when I'm adding the top color on, I call it like petting the cat, or petting your dog or your hamster, right? Where I'm just gently grabbing the fibers, and I'm just very gently, I'm being very careful around my fingers. Right, and this has gotten thick, so I'm just going to pull that off and set that aside, right? And as I come around, I'm trying to not get things too bulky. So again, I'm petting the cat. If you're using a single needle, it will take longer, but it's not impossible. You know what I mean? Like it's just having some patience while you're working on this part. So as you can see, I work on a section, and then as I come around, I'm always just gently brushing the wool because I want to hold it close to my core shape, right? I spent all that time making my core shape pretty, and again, because this is Dorset wool, it's a bit chunky. If I were using Maori or something like that, it would be a bit smoother. But yeah, I don't know what kind of wool you're going to be using. If you don't have right, if you bought a supply pack, or maybe you bought a starter kit, you have a ton of wool and you haven't gotten started yet, and this is your first project, right? So everyone's going to have something different. I'm not going to go over adding roving. You could, and if you have roving, it's that more stringy wool, and I would just lay it in one direction, right on your tomato, and then wherever your middle part's going to be is where I would, like when you go to put your stem, that's where I would have your fibers all meet up. So I would just keep taking your roving and just laying it on, and maybe do another lay like this, right, until you get it on, right? So you can see as I'm adding this one on, here I'm going to cover up most of that, right? So you can see where there was white here. This piece is going to come up and over, but I still have pieces here that aren't covered. Now, if you used a color core wool, right, it may not matter. You may not see it, right? So I do have some red core Dorset from the same place in Alberta that I bought this white wool. And for me, like if we're making these as gifts or to sell at a market, I would be using that over the white. But like I said, white is the most available that I've seen on the market, especially if you're going to buy from a local farmer. Then you'll find that like they may not have a lot of choices. A lot of times I find that if you do buy from a farm, they will actually, this wool that they would also use as core wool, they may naturally dye and dye the wool, the colors, and or even just acid dyeing the colors, and it'll be the same wool. So that's helpful. So you can look into it, right? You know, this is the joy of felting. And the joy of any fiber art. Once you get involved, you just keep buying more and more. What is it? The stash. You know, people who work with yarn, people who work with fabric. Everybody's got a stash, right? You keep buying stuff with the hopes of or the plans of making more. So I hope that this helps you use some of your stash of this project. I do have a video on how to make a pumpkin. It's similar to this project. So, you know, if you wanted to make, if you really enjoyed this project and you wanted to make a pumpkin, definitely watch that. It's a simple pumpkin. I don't go into like full adding, you know, warts and things like that, but it would just be a simple pumpkin. Okay, so see how you can see that white. So how I cover patches is I will take some of the wool and lay it over, and then I can see it's going to be covered. And so I'll take a fine needle or a finer needle, and I will tack that down. And then I could take this needle and do, like, so this is my 5 needle punch tool. And I could do that. If you've got like a coarser needle or a medium needle and you want a finer needle, you could switch those out. I actually have a couple tools where I do have a different set of needles in here. So you could, as long as if you're going to order from a company online, like say you're going to order from someone, replacement needles, you can always ask and say, like, will your needles fit into the clover tool? I've taken the safety off. I've also, like, don't put the cap on. So, I'm one of those people. I work every day. I needle felt. So, right, you know, for me, it's just about time. Okay. I don't need to put it away. I don't have kids and I don't have any pets, so I don't have to worry about anyone hurting themselves on the needles. Okay, so if you rub on your like right now, if I rub my hand on here, I can see that the wool isn't quite connected. I would spend a little more time on this. So what I've done is, see how I would immediately, I just kind of took my fingers and spread the wool closer to the shape, and I'm using my multi-tool to help smooth that down. You could take a fine needle, and I can do this similar if you're targeting a specific spot, right? I wouldn't worry about getting this super duper smooth. It is wool. And again, the wool I'm using is a bit chunkier, so I'm not going to get that nice smooth that I might get with, say, the Maori wool. So I would just slowly just tack down some of the really fuzzy wool, but I'm not going to worry about whether it fuzzes out or not. If you put I made this mistake. I stabbed a reverse needle into one of my tomatoes, and not realizing that I did that. When I pulled it out, it was pulled some of the wool out. So I would say I wouldn't put your reverse needles if you're a needle felter into your tomato, but you know, easily, like I can really easily get pins in here. So that's the test. So they're in, but they're not scooshing in, and they're not divoting into here. So that's a good sign that it's a good firmness. If yours got super squishy, I would say maybe you want to do the tying the knot technique, and it should get you a firmer piece. So the key is to keep the wool as close as possible to your shape when you're stabbing it, right? So like if this was really squishy and I did something like this, right, where I'm pinching it, right, I could get this firmer now because I'm holding those fibers even closer together. So just think of that when you're working on your piece. So I said I was going to show you if you wanted to add like an heirlooming, bleeding look to your tomato. What I do is I take a piece. I find the ones that I did online, they look like they have points. Like they almost look like little triangular lines that come down. And you can see I vary it and I let it get kind of muddled in here in spots. So this is, again, up to you what you want to do. You can see here they look more like little triangles coming down. And I did it varying, like I didn't have it all even coming down. So if you want to do that, what I usually do is I'll pull a piece off and I'll just do a little twist to get that, just get that little point there on the end. And then I'll lay it on and I'll just spread the fibers out here at the top. Well, first you have to pick a top and a bottom. So if this is my top, a lot of times I'll just create like a little divot here just so I remember that that's the top, right? And the bottom would be smooth. There wouldn't be anything on the bottom. Okay, so then I would just what I'm doing is I'm just getting the fibers to be a little bit random and a little more what I call loosey-goosey. So that way it will just blend into other wools. So I'll just take a needle. You could take a fine needle or you could just take a, like I'd say the coarse needle might be too coarse. So I would maybe go with a medium needle and I just tack that on. And I'm just randomly tacking it on for now because I'm going to keep adding pieces. If this is too much of a triangle, you could just leave it a little bit loose. Like, so in other words, I didn't really twist it and I just tacking it on and I'm letting it blend a little bit in there. You could take a little bit of your loose fibers and you could just, what I'm doing is I'm just laying down some loose fibers and sorry, it got stuck. And so I'm just randomly tacking that on. I'm going to use a much finer needle. You could always just gently move it around a little bit to get it to randomize it a bit more. Right, and again, I can come in here and add just a little piece that I left super loose, where I just left all the fibers loose, and I could just lay that down and tack that on over it and just play around, right? Again, if I take a tool like this, it'll start to you know, randomize it. And again, like I just do a little twist and then lay it down and tack this in. And again, it takes practice. This is a different wool than I'm using than what I did here. I found this wool let itself spread out a little easier. So if you're finding the wool that you're using maybe is giving you problems, you could always go and maybe try a different wool, right? Again, there's so many different kinds out there, right? You could play and have a lot of fun with this. Right? So I'm not going to spend the whole time working on this, adding that in, but you can see how you just keep adding layers to it. You can have one come down more. Eventually what I'll do is I'll wind up to cover that top. I could again add more wool on the top, right? And tack that in, right? So again, just keep playing, you know, keep varying, like thin it out. So I'm just thinning out the color and I can add that on and that'll help make it more random. You could stab in the direction of the wool fibers and that'll help them bleed a bit more into each other. You could always just add a little bit of a thin piece of the green across it at the top and that'll help fill it in as well. You could take your multi-tool and that will help. If you're having a lot of trouble and it's not really blending, you could always take a thin piece of the red wool and lay that over and tack that on, and that can help it as well to blend a bit more. And again, for time, I'm just going to do this. Okay. Right. So picture I did that to the whole thing. So I'm just going to remove what I did. I didn't really tack this in too heavily, so I'm just going to pull this off so I can easier show you how to add to make the stem and the leaves. So because I pulled it off, I just need to tack it back down again. You can always take wool off. As you saw, it was starting to pull a lot of my red off. Like, see, it started pulling some of the red off. So I'm, so just remember that you'll have to tack that back on again. Okay, so remember I was saying, like, you want to pick, I'm going to say this is my top here. So what I do is I create each leaf. So I did count, and there's usually 6. There's usually 6 leaves that go around, and they go in this bit of this pattern. I do make the leaves and add them on, and then I add the stem. For the sake of time, I'm just going to make a couple leaves, and then I'll make the stem, and I'll just show you how I add them on. You'll go at your own pace. So I usually will pre-measure my leaves. I try to keep them consistently the same as far as how much wool I have in here and how thick that wool is. Again, using a different type of wool. So you have to kind of figure this out. I wound up, I noticed when I was making some of my samples that I actually pulled off too much wool. Like I didn't need as much to make the leaves as I thought. But it's good to always pre-measure, and then whatever you do the one, you do to all. So in other words, when I go to create my first little leaf, if I needed to remove, say, like that much wool, I would want to do that to all of them. So I'm just going to set these aside, and let's try this one first. So what I did is, instead of doing what I did before where I took it and I twisted it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stab a little leafy shape, and these leaves are thin, just into the wool. And then I'm going to just gently fold the one top, like the top down a little bit, and then the one side, and I tack that down, and then I fold over the other side and tack that down. Now, if you made yours too thick, I would recommend starting over and just using half the amount. The thing is, you could always add more, but it's really hard to take it away, right? It's hard to take away the amount of wool. So if I were to, like, say I did it about the width of my index finger, and you can see it's probably, again, maybe 1/4 of an inch thick, but I did it about the width. This is for my tomato. I'm going to, this might be a little large, but I'm going to show you. Once I stab it on, I will fold it over again just to get those fibers down. And then I'll take it in my hand. You want to leave one end fuzzy. So you always want to leave one end fuzzy. And I can take it in my hand and start rolling it like this, right? I can roll it like this as long as I have one end that stays fuzzy. And give it a stab. You could take your multi-tool at this point, right, and stab that. And then I constantly rolling and stabbing. Now it is in a, it does taper right to the edge, and it does go a bit wider down into the stem, right, so you can see. So you definitely want to make sure that the tip has that point, but that you do want it to taper out a bit to the bottom. If this is too wide, you could just take your needle, and I'm just sort of stabbing it on the edge, and then I'm rolling it again. So what I'm trying to do is get that tapered feel, and I want it to be firm enough that it's not going to fall apart if like my needle or one of my pins gets caught on it. Right? So I will do this similar here. So what I did was just think about this, think like that I'm stabbing around a stencil, right? And I'm just getting the shape into my wool, and then I'm just gently folding the top down. If you can't fold the top down, like it's too difficult, as long as you fold it over and then fold it again, you'll get that that shape, right? The other thing too is like I was folding it around, right? So I was taking this wool and I was then tucking it on the other side. But if you have too much, you can always pull some off, right? So once I get those loose fibers on, I'll do that same, roll it in my hand, and then stab it, and then like roll it in my hand. You take the multi-tool, make sure you leave one in fuzzy. What the multi-tool is doing is I'm just punching it so that it gets a bit more connected together, all those loose fibers. And I do a slight sideways stab where I'm stabbing the wool down and diagonal into itself. That helps connect the fibers a different way, not just up and down, but getting them to connect this way. Now, I can take a look at my wool and see this one's a lot larger, so I'm definitely going to pull some of this wool off. Because this is batting and it's short fibers, I pinch where I want to pull it off, right? So I was pinching it where I wanted it to, I didn't want it to unravel. If you feel like it's a little thin, like so maybe mine started to misshape, I could take a little bit of wool and I can add it to the bottom and tack that on to build a little thickness back up. So if it got a little thin down there, and again, you could multi-needle punch tool. A lot of times, I'll fold it over, but I'll make sure it's really loose, and then I'll fold it over and tack that on. And you can see how it can get a little time-consuming to create 6, but it looks really nice when you're done. And if you look at your tomatoes, they typically tend to have 6 leaves around the edge, right? So pretend I made 6 of these, and what I'll do then is I will lay one down where I created that little divot. I'll lay one down and I'll tack that on. Now, if you're going to do this kind of coloring, do that before this is the final stage of this project. So what I'm going to do is I'm stabbing it, angling it down into the shape, getting these loose fibers, right? So I want to make sure that this is really attached to my tomato. So I'll stab it down straight into the tomato, right underneath, and then on the top, right? And what I do is then I'll add the next one. And so you can see the pattern here. It's basically your standard 6-point star, right? So you've got, it almost looks like it's straight down and then angle, angle. And so that's how you would lay them down. And again, for the second one, I would stab that in, same treatment, right? And you can see where I would go all the way around. Make sure you stab underneath, right? And then you get them all on there. I did really play around with getting them once all the fibers were on, and when you do add it on, like you're going to put a stem on top, but if you were worried about seeing seams and stuff, you just make sure you loosen up that loose wool, and when you lay it on, right, it'll blend in with the other wool. Right, so there you can see. And the last thing, I'm just going to set these pieces aside. The last thing would be is to make the stem. So when I create a stem, I pull a thin piece of wool off. In this case, best guess is probably about 4 inches. There, again, I'm not sure how big I want to make this. I may not need all of this. So I say pull off a strip. Again, you can add more if you needed more to add on to it. If you look at tomato stems, they're probably even thinner than what I did here. This one I made a little bit thin. This one got a little thicker. And this one I made a little shorter and thinner. But it's still probably not as skinny as what a regular tomato has. But that's okay. So I have these 2 skewers. This is a barbecue skewer that I just got at the store. And then there's the toothpick. If you use a toothpick, sometimes I find when you have a shorter thing to wrap around, right? So we're going to wrap around this. It might be a little harder to wrap on. This might not be too bad. So if you find, though, you do have an issue with that, I would definitely get hold of one of these. Unfortunately, they sell them in packs of 100. If you get them at the dollar store, a lot of times they're going to be really long. But maybe you have a friend, or if you go to the restaurant, you can just ask them for one. And sometimes kits will come with them as well. But, you know, we all have toothpicks, right? So if you use the toothpick, what I'm doing is I'm going to take one of the fuzzy ends, and I'm going to start wrapping it around the skewer. And I'm going to wrap it up to the size I want, and I'm going to wrap around a couple times, and then I'll wrap back down. If you have it where you could get it to the size, like in other words, you pulled off a piece and it's already that size, you could just then wrap it around and around like this. So you could just use the width and just wrap it around. So if you have that option, it makes it a bit easier to do. And then I just gently tack the top, and I do stab around the base. When I say I stab around the base, I just want to make sure it won't unravel, and then I give it some stabs along the side. You could take your hand and roll it like this, and again, as long as you tack down that top part first, and you establish that like you're holding the base, it shouldn't unravel much at all. I had to switch to a fine needle, and you always stab along the edge of where it's wrapped, right? So this is where if you wanted to make it, if you wanted to make this fatter, right, then you could add more to it, right? But maybe you're okay with that. And then I gently slide that off. And then I'll take my needle again and I'll establish that this is my, ow, you didn't see that, right? I didn't stab myself. Again, I'll stab around the base. Again, you want to leave it fuzzy, right? So you just want to leave it fuzzy. And sometimes I'll tug at the base of these types of things. That'll also help secure that bottom edge a little bit more, right? So that's the, if you have it the length you want it. If you didn't have it the length you wanted it, I'm going to add more on. I took a little piece and I'm adding that on, and then I have another little piece here. It didn't get even up here. So I'm taking a thin piece and I'm just going to wrap it around the top here. And then I'm going to just tack this on because I had to keep adding the pieces. I just need to really make sure that that's been connected to the other fibers, so you can see it's not connected quite yet. So there, I'm tacking that on. And then I could take it with my finger and roll it. You could lick your fingers and roll it. It's starting to unravel at the base, so I've just taken my finger and I've pushed on that, and I'm just going to give it some stabs And you could really stab more once it's off the skewer, but I'm limited to just stabbing it when it's on the skewer. So I just slid that off, and again I'm gonna make sure that this is on here. Ow. This is not easy to do. If you've got like little tools, you could definitely like finger tools come in handy here. You saw nothing today. And this is where I find using a single needle really does help in the process. Using a multi-needle, I've already stabbed myself twice in this demo. Right, you just wind up, right, you just want to make sure, like a multi-tool might be too aggressive. Like I said, even though I've already stabbed myself twice in this demo. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spread the fibers from the bottom apart. I want them to be random, because all these little random fibers are now going to connect into the tomato, right? And I will put that in the center, right? So pretend I have all these leaves here, and I will just stab all these loose fibers into the tomato shape. So see how I'm getting all those loose fibers in and around, right? So I'm establishing it in here. And right now it's loose, but the idea is that you'd be able to pull on it and it won't come off. Same with the leaves. You don't want to be able to pull these out, so you want to make sure they're secure enough in there that they won't come out. So that's pretty much how you would create your tomatoes. Oh yeah, and if you wanted to do green, you could use green, like yellow, orange, whatever colors you want. And there you have it. That's how you needle felt tomatoes. As you saw in the video, I did stab myself. Stabbing happens. It's a labor of love, and because of the sharp needles, it happens to all of us. So hopefully if this was your first time and you stabbed yourself a few times, you feel better. If you didn't stab yourself, congratulations. You're well on your way. But yeah, so no matter how much experience you have, you'll stab yourself. It's just the nature of the projects. And I get really super detailed, so I get all in there and start stabbing. So if you want, so one thing I need to go over with you is that it's a pin cushion. You probably want it to sit flat. So if you're concerned with the flatness of the bottom, what I tend to do is I do the table test, right? So I'll lay it on the table. I'll just put it on my pad for now. And if it's wobbly, I will see if I can figure out where it's wobbly and give it some stabs and then press it down. Your multi-tool will help with this, right? And to help press it down. It has a little bit of memory. If I press my finger, it might flatten it for just like about 10 seconds or so, and I can then stab down like that. Same with the top. When you add your leaves and stuff, it'll start to create a bit more of a divot. Like I remember I showed you how to do a divot, but again, you could always like press on it to get it to become a little bit more flat on the top as well. So that's how I make sure that it'll stay a bit more flat on the tabletop. It is a tomato, and like I said, it is organic, so it'll probably do whatever. It can be a little wobbly, as long as your needles stay in it, right? And they balance well. And so anyway, I hope you had a great time making your own tomatoes. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. My contact information's in the description part of this video. Also, the last frame of the video will also have ways you can connect with me. And make sure you send me photos. I want to see your pin cushions, or if you decided to have a bowl of tomatoes, I want to see those 10 tomatoes that you needle felted. So definitely send me a message and show me your pictures. So anyway, thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a great day.